Hello and good day, everyone. My name is Darlena Birch, MBA, RDN, and most importantly, public health dietitian. Welcome to my YouTube channel, where I talk about U.S. federal nutrition programs, the important role they play in ensuring the health of all Americans, and how public health dietitians work tirelessly to support these amazing programs. Today, I'm going to discuss some of the major U.S. federal nutrition programs just to give you, the viewer, a better understanding of why they're important and how they were created. Now, before I start today's episode, I just want to let you guys know that all of my references will be cited in the description box. So if you ever want to go check my work, learn more for yourself, or just kind of follow along with what I'm reading, you can absolutely just visit the links and learn more about each of these federal nutrition programs. The first program I'm going to discuss today is the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, better known as the WIC Program. Now, as I stated in my first episode, WIC is actually the federal nutrition program that I've dedicated my entire career to. So this is one that hits close to home and one that I know particularly well. And so I just want to give you a brief overview as to why this program was created in the first place and some of the nuances that makes it different from other federal nutrition programs. WIC was first piloted as a supplemental food program in 1972, and the aim of the program was to improve the health of pregnant mothers, infants, and children in response to growing concern over malnutrition among many poverty-stricken mothers and young children. By 1974, WIC was made a permanent program through legislation, and the first WIC site actually opened in Kentucky in January of that year. By the end of 1974, WIC was operating in 45 states. Now, when WIC first started, it provided supplemental foods to program participants. By 1978, legislation was introduced into the WIC program that allowed for new elements to be incorporated. One of the elements included nutrition education that had to be provided to program participants. In addition, the supplemental foods were required to contain nutrients found lacking in the target population, and they needed to have relatively low levels of fat, sugar, and salt. The third stipulation was that states needed to coordinate referrals to social services, including immunization, alcohol and drug abuse prevention, and child abuse counseling, as well as family planning. Now, I do want to say that WIC has come a long way since 1978, and so the health and social services that are actually provided by the program span far more than those that I just listed. By 1992, WIC introduced an enhanced food package for exclusively breastfeeding mothers, intended to promote breastfeeding among program participants. Now, I'm not sure how many of my YouTube viewers are going to be familiar with the WIC program. Maybe you've participated in it, maybe you knew a friend or a relative who was on it. But one of the things that WIC is most well known for is as the infant formula program. So when WIC was first started, as I stated, they recognized that there was a lot of issues regarding malnutrition within low-income populations across the US. And one of the biggest issues was actually iron deficiency anemia. And so iron-fortified infant formula was provided as a means to help infants get that iron that they needed. Now, by the late 80s, early 90s, the program was beginning to realize that while we were trying to promote infant fortified formula as a means to help improve the nutrition of babies across the nation, one of the things that was kind of falling by the wayside was the promotion of breastfeeding. So by 1992, the WIC program introduced an enhanced food package intended for exclusively breastfeeding mothers as a means to promote breastfeeding. By 1997, USDA implemented the Loving Support Makes Breastfeeding Work campaign, which was intended to increase breastfeeding rates among WIC mothers while also improving public support of breastfeeding. In 2004, the Breastfeeding Peer Counseling Initiative was launched, and this allowed women with breastfeeding experience to receive some training to ultimately become a peer counselor. Oftentimes, peer counselors in this program are former WIC participants themselves, and they're able to support current WIC participants in their breastfeeding journey. I'll talk more about the Breastfeeding Peer Counseling program in another episode, so stay tuned for that. In 2009, the Institute of Medicine, which is currently known as the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, aka NASEM, completed its first review of the WIC food package. Now, with the 2009 food package recommendations from NASEM, USDA implemented changes that better aligned it with the dietary guidelines for Americans, as well as established dietary recommendations for infants and children over 2 years of age. So the reason why I went over this brief timeline and went over the history of the WIC program is just to give you, the viewer, a better understanding of why WIC exists in the first place. During the 1960s, there was a lot of increasing awareness and public outrage regarding hunger in America and malnutrition, particularly among low-income populations. So by the early 1970s, you see that the WIC program was piloted, made permanent in legislation by the mid-1970s. And so over the nearly 50 years of the WIC program, you can see how the program has grown and evolved, where it began providing only supplemental foods to now a program that provides nutrition education, breastfeeding support, referrals to health and social services, as well as supplemental foods to help improve the health of income-qualified women, infants, and children nationwide. Now, I'll go into more specifics of this program later on in future episodes, but this was just a high-level overview to talk about the WIC program specifically. Now, the next program I'm going to talk about is known federally as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, aka SNAP, but it's actually better known among the common population as the food stamps program. Now, one distinct difference between the food stamps program and WIC is that in WIC, you are issued a supplemental food benefit. So when you go into the grocery store, you may only be able to buy like a dozen eggs, 16 ounces of bread, 64 ounces of juice, 3 gallons of milk. But with SNAP, you are actually given a dollar amount that you can take to the grocery store to buy your groceries. Now, there is a very distinctive reason for why this exists, and it very much ties back to the history of the program. The best way that I can describe the differences between WIC and SNAP is that WIC exists to provide nutrition support to very specific target populations, but SNAP is a program that's more intended to address hunger. The first food stamp program actually began in 1935. Now, the idea for the first food stamp program is credited to various people, most notably Secretary of Agriculture Henry Wallace and the program's first administrator, Milo Perkins. The program operated by permitting individuals on relief to buy orange stamps equal to their normal food expenditures. So for every dollar worth of orange stamps purchased, 50 cents worth of blue stamps were received. Orange stamps could then be used to buy any food. Blue stamps could only be used to buy food determined by the department to be in surplus. Over the course of nearly 4 years, the first FSP reached approximately 20 million people at one time or another in nearly half of the counties in the United States. And peak participation was 4 million at a total cost of $262 million. Now, by 1943, the food stamp program actually ended since, and I quote, "the conditions that brought the program into being, unmarketable food surpluses and widespread unemployment, no longer existed." From 1961 through 1964, the food stamp program actually does get resurrected and piloted again. The 18 years between the end of the first food stamp program and the inception of the next were filled with studies, reports, and legislative proposals. So even though the program didn't exist for 18 years, there was a lot going on behind the scenes and in Congress regarding this program. Prominent senators actively associated with attempts to enact an FSP during this period. President Kennedy's first executive order was actually in relation to food stamps. On February 2nd, 1961, he announced the initiation of food stamp pilot programs. The pilot programs retained the requirement that the food stamps be purchased, but they also eliminated the concept of special stamps for surplus foods. On January 31st, 1964, President Johnson actually requested Congress to pass legislation to make the food stamp program permanent. Among the official purposes of the Food Stamp Act was to strengthen the agricultural economy and provide improved levels of nutrition among low-income households. However, the practical purpose was to bring the pilot food stamp program under congressional control and to enact the regulations into law. The Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 actually had implications for the nutrition education that was provided in food stamps, by now known as SNAP. So it restructured SNAP Ed, which is the nutrition education piece of the program, as the Nutrition Education and Obesity Prevention Grant Program, which thus changed its financial structure to that of a 100% federal grant funding to states with no state contribution or match. So that's my brief history or overview of the food stamp, aka SNAP program, and I apologize as it was maybe a little bit hard to follow, but some of the key takeaways is that the program actually began back in 1939, while the program did end in 1943 and wasn't resurrected again until the 1960s. The program has always had its roots as a program that helps to provide hunger relief to program participants. Since its recreation in the 1960s, the food stamp program has undergone a lot of programmatic changes, as have all of these federal nutrition programs. So the next program I want to talk about is the Child and Adult Care Food Program, known as CACFP. Now, CACFP was first established by Congress in 1968 under Section 17 of the National School Lunch Act. Participation was actually limited to center-based child care in areas where poor economic conditions existed. But by 1975, it was separated under the Child Care Food Program and the Summer Food Service Program. Beginning in 1976, family child care homes were eligible to participate in the CACFP program, provided that they met state licensing requirements where they existed or otherwise obtained approval from an appropriate state or local agency. So basically, CACFP, when it comes to children, is administered under child care facilities. So if you take your child to a daycare, that facility may be participating in the CACFP program. In addition, homes had to be sponsored by a public or private nonprofit organization that assumed responsibility for ensuring compliance with federal and state regulations, and that acts as a conduit for meal reimbursements. Initially, reimbursement rates for meals and snacks served in homes, like those served in centers, were based on a means test of the family incomes or individual children. So long story short, all it's saying is that, when there's a child care facility that's participating in the program, they need to actually have a CACFP sponsor that helps them with the reimbursement of meals. And so the meals are provided, and then these various facilities will get their reimbursement from the program itself. Now, in December of 1978, there were fewer than 12,000 family child care providers that were participating in the CACFP program. Now, when the program first started, it focused more so on children, but by August 1981, one of the major changes was that the program was expanded to include mentally or physically handicapped persons, regardless of their age, who were enrolled in an institution or facility caring for a majority of children 18 or younger. Now, I do want to clarify something. I've been using the term CACFP interchangeably, but it's not actually until 1989, with the Child Nutrition and WIC Reauthorization Act, that the name of the program was changed to the Child and Adult Care Food Program. Prior to, I believe it was known as the Child Food Care Program, so CFCP, but by 1989 it changes its name to CACFP. Now again, I can't say I have too much to say about the CACFP program, mostly because it's a program that I'm probably the least familiar with among the federal nutrition programs, but one of the big takeaways I just want you to recognize is that it does actually provide food to children and adults. Now, the next program I'm going to talk about is the School Breakfast Program, which was established in 1966 as a 2-year pilot project designed to provide categorical grants to assist schools serving breakfast to nutritionally needy children. Now, you may be noticing a trend that the vast majority of these programs were first created in either the 60s or 70s. With regards to the food stamp program, this was resurrected in the 60s. But as you can see, that this was a time in our nation where there was a lot of awareness regarding malnutrition and hunger in the nation. And so these programs were created out of necessity to help feed our nation. And as such, they should be protected. During the next few years, the pilot program was extended several times, and a number of modifications were actually made to expand the program. In 1971, Congress directed that the priority consideration for the program would include schools in which there was a special need to improve the nutrition and dietary practices of children of working mothers and children from low-income families. Even more important, in 1973, the categorical grant reimbursement structure was replaced by a system of specific per meal reimbursement. In 1975, the program actually received permanent authorization. As part of the legislation making the school breakfast program permanent, Congress declared its intent that the program be made available in all schools where it is needed to provide adequate nutrition for children in attendance. Moreover, the legislation continued to emphasize participation by schools in severe need and to provide higher reimbursement to these schools. Now, I'm going to be honest and say I didn't do too much to research the school breakfast program, and I wish I had more to share with you on this episode, but given the length of how much I talked about WIC and the food stamp program, I don't want to add on. I do promise you that there will be an episode dedicated specifically to the school breakfast program and how it works, so please stay tuned for that. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the school lunch program. And the school lunch program is similar to food stamps in the sense of its history and when it began. Now, the school lunch program started in 1932, and stockpiled agricultural surpluses, aka commodities, were supplied to some public schools. But we know that by 1946, President Harry Truman signed the National School Lunch Act, which established the National School Lunch Program. Now we're going to jump from the 1940s to the 1960s, where in 1966, the Child Nutrition Act created a 2-year breakfast pilot, established food service equipment assistance, and increased funds to needy children. In 1969, the White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health led to the expansion of child nutrition programs and the free and reduced price school lunch program. Again, I'll talk more specifically about these programs on my episode specific to the school lunch program. In 1981, the federal administration cut 1/3 of child nutrition funding, with devastating consequences for school meal programs and the National School Lunch Program participation. So here you can see how the program is continually evolving and changing with the times to stay up to date and ultimately to ensure that adequate nutrition support is being provided to program participants, in this case, children in schools. By 2014, smart snacks and school nutrition standards are implemented, establishing nutrition standards for food sold a la carte or in vending machines and snack bars. Now I'm going to pivot to 2020 and talk about the National School Lunch Program with relation to the pandemic. School meal programs across the country pivoted to establish curbside and grab-and-go feedings in a matter of days as schools closed due to the pandemic. And so as you can see, these programs have existed for decades upon decades. They're actually very important programs to have, and I believe wholeheartedly in every single one of them. And while you may not be someone that is participating in these programs, there are a lot of people involved in each and every single one of these programs, more than just the program participants themselves. There are entire, what I would describe as microeconomies that work to support these programs. And so in my future episodes, I'll talk more about each and every one of these, and I apologize that I didn't give as much attention to the school breakfast program or the school lunch program, but I promise I will give way more information when I give those specific episodes themselves. But thank you so much for joining me today, and if you like what you see, please smash the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, you are your own best advocate. Feed your body well, nourish your soul, nurture your mind, and nutrify your spirit. Always remain true to yourself, and remember that every second forward is another opportunity to be a better version of your past self.